The stillness of my Redwood Falls apartment on a Sunday afternoon died the moment Darlene called. Her frantic voice crackled through a hospital intercom. "Grant is in the emergency room at Ridgeway Medical Center," she shrieked. "We need $35,000 for the deposit right now." She still called me his wife, as if the divorce never happened. I felt a cold laugh rising in my chest. "You have the wrong person," I said. "My name is Megan Caldwell, and at 34 years old, I had finally learned that silence is often the loudest sound in a room." I picked up, and immediately, the sterile, rhythmic beep of a hospital monitor pierced through the speaker. Darlene did not say hello. She was hyperventilating, her voice frantic against the backdrop of a paging system. She spoke as if the ink on our divorce papers had not dried months ago, as if the restraining orders and the screaming matches in court were just a bad dream she had decided to forget. I let out a short, sharp laugh. It was not a sound of joy. It was the dry, hollow cackle of a woman who had been crushed by the very people now begging for her hand. "Darlene," I said, my voice as flat as the North Carolina plains, "you have the wrong person. I am not his wife, and I am certainly not his bank." "How can you be so cold?" she shrieked, her tone shifting from pleading to vitriol in a heartbeat. "He is the father of your child. I will tell everyone in this town what kind of heartless woman you are. I will go to your office. I will drag your reputation through the dirt if you let my son die over a few dollars." I leaned back against the kitchen counter, feeling a strange, icy calm settle over my ribs. "With what?" "Darlene. What exactly are you planning to buy my pity with? You spent 4 years telling me I was nothing. You watched him bleed me dry and called it a wife's duty. So, tell me, why should I care?" There was a muffled sound on the other end, a sob that sounded more like a choke. Then, the slip happened, the one crack in her armor I had been waiting for. That girl Brielle, she disappeared. She took it all. She took the money. "Megan," Darlene gasped, her voice trembling so hard I could almost hear her teeth chattering. "Grant is alone. We have nothing left." The mention of Brielle Knox was like a match hitting a powder keg in my brain. The mistress, the secretary, the woman they had both used to replace me while I was still sleeping in the next room. I did not promise a single cent. I did not offer a word of comfort. I simply pressed the red button on the screen and stood there in the silence of my kitchen. I was not standing there out of love. I was standing there because I knew this was it. This was the final door, the one that would let me finish the job and expose everything Grant Harlow had tried to bury. I walked to the small floor safe hidden in the back of my closet. My fingers moved with practiced precision as I punched in the code. Inside lay a thick, heavy manila envelope. It was the fruit of months of silent, agonizing labor. Bank statements with highlighted discrepancies, printed emails from accounts he thought I never knew existed, grainy screenshots of wire transfers, and a digital recorder that held the sound of his own undoing. I grabbed my trench coat and went to the mirror. I applied a layer of deep red lipstick, sharp and precise, making my face look like a mask of cold porcelain. My daughter, Lila, was playing with her blocks in the living room. She was 7 years old, with eyes that held too much of her father's charm and none of his malice. "Lila, honey, we are going to Grandma and Grandpa's house for a little bit," I said, keeping my voice gentle. After dropping her off, I climbed into my car and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. As I pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the hospital, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Tonight is not about saving a soul. I whispered to the empty car. Tonight is about staring at the truth. 6 years ago, I walked into the Harlow residence in the leafy, manicured suburb of Cedar Ridge with the naive optimism of a woman who believed a wedding ring was a promise of partnership. The house was a classic colonial, white siding and navy shutters, looking every bit like the American dream. Our wedding had been a blur of expensive lace and expensive promises, a perfect day that I thought was the start of my real life. I was 28 years old, and I thought I knew what family meant. The illusion shattered on our very first night as a married couple. We were still in our wedding finery when Darlene sat us down at the heavy oak dining table. She didn't offer a toast. Instead, she slid a handwritten ledger across the wood. "We have family rules in this house. Megan," she said, her voice thin and sharp as a razor. "To avoid any unnecessary waste, both you and Grant will hand over your paychecks to me at the end of every month. I will manage the household expenses and the savings. It is for your own good." I looked at Grant, waiting for him to laugh, waiting for him to tell his mother that we were adults who could manage our own finances. But Grant just stared at his hands. "Mom knows what she is doing. Megan," he whispered. "She has kept this family afloat for years. Just do it for the sake of peace." At the time, I was a rising star at Northbridge Strategies. As a project manager, I was responsible for budgets totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. I was sharp, efficient, and well paid. Yet, every Monday morning, Darlene would hand me a crisp $20 bill for my personal weekly expenses. Every Friday evening, I had to present her with a stack of crumpled receipts. If I spent $5 on a latte to get through a 10-hour workday, I had to endure a lecture on my lack of discipline. My life became a high-speed treadmill. I would spend 45 hours a week navigating corporate politics and intense deadlines, only to come home to a second shift of scrubbing floors and folding Grant's laundry under Darlene's watchful, critical eye. I began to lose my friends. I couldn't join them for happy hour or weekend trips because I had no money of my own and no control over my time. Every invitation was met with Darlene's disapproval. "A real wife finds her joy at home. Megan," she would say while inspecting the baseboards for dust, "why do you need to go out? Are we not enough for you?" Whenever I tried to push back, Grant would retreat into the shadows. He was the golden boy in public, charming and sweet, but at home, he was a ghost. He would wait for his mother to finish tearing me down before sighing and looking at me with disappointment. "You are being so calculating. Megan," he would say when I asked why we couldn't have our own bank account. "Why do you have to be so disrespectful to the woman who took you in? You are being so difficult. I thought things would change when I got pregnant with Lila. I thought the arrival of a grandchild would soften Darlene and turn Grant into a protector, but the cage only grew smaller. My pregnancy became another reason for them to bind me. My salary, which had increased with a promotion, was now funneled into a college fund I wasn't allowed to see. You have to sacrifice now. Megan, Darlene said as I sat on the sofa, exhausted and swollen in my third trimester. A mother's life is nothing but sacrifice. Grant is out there working so hard. He is so tired from the stress of the world. The least you can do is keep this house in order. I was the one earning 30% more than my husband, yet I was treated like a charity case in my own home. I realized then that the most cruel part of my life wasn't the lack of money. It was the absolute theft of my agency. I was living a life I had built with my own sweat, but I was not allowed to own a single second of it. I started the notebook in my second year of marriage. It was a tiny black moleskin, hidden in the lining of an old winter coat at the back of the closet. In it, I recorded every cent I earned and every cent they took. I tracked the withdrawals Darlene made for things that didn't make sense. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger of my captivity. I would sit in the dark, writing down the numbers, counting the days like a prisoner scratching lines into a stone wall, waiting for the moment the gate would finally swing open. The change in Grant didn't happen with a bang. It was a slow, calculated shift that felt like a cold draft entering a locked room. He started grooming himself with a precision I hadn't seen since our first year of dating. There were new suits from a boutique downtown, a gym membership he actually used, and a 6-digit passcode on his phone that replaced the birthday we used to share. Most telling of all, the phone followed him everywhere, even into the steam of the bathroom. It was the classic cliché of a failing marriage, the kind of signs every woman recognizes but no one wants to admit are happening to her. Then, the universe handed me the first thread. One Tuesday night, while Grant was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. A notification lit up the lock screen. "I will see you tonight. I miss you." The sender was Brielle Knox, an administrative assistant from a partner firm we did business with at Northbridge Strategies. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. My heart stayed unnervingly steady as I took a photo of the screen with my own device. I began to look deeper, not with the eyes of a jealous wife, but with the cold, analytical brain of a project manager. I waited for the moments Darlene took her afternoon naps to sit at her computer. I found a trail of digital breadcrumbs that made my stomach turn. There were transfers for designer handbags, spa days, and even expensive vitamins, all labeled as household expenses. The dates of these withdrawals matched perfectly with the days Darlene claimed she was holding my salary for safekeeping. The true blow came when I found a backup of a text thread between Grant and his mother. "Brielle is having a baby. A fresh start." Grant had written, "She is the daughter I always wanted for you. Not that cold machine Megan." Darlene's reply burned into my retinas. "This child is the reward for everything we have endured. Just keep her quiet until she signs the land papers." I sat in the dark for a long time after reading that. They weren't just betraying me. They were a coordinated team. Darlene was the treasurer, Grant was the consumer, and I was the bottomless well of resources they were pumping dry. It was a business model where my youth and my labor were the only capital. I knew I couldn't fight them on their turf. If I reacted with emotion, they would use their connections in Cedar Ridge to paint me as unstable. They would hit me with lies and use their reputation to bury me. I needed a professional. I reached out to a forensic accountant named Sarah, a contact I'd met through a hushed referral. I spent my lunch hours in her cramped, paper-filled office, learning how to read the truth hidden in the margins of bank statements. "He is in deep..." "Megan," Sarah told me, pointing at a series of odd, high-interest withdrawals. "This isn't just about a mistress. These look like private loans, the kind you take from people who don't use a bank. It's a mess of pooled capital joint ventures that look more like a shell game." Then came the secondary plot. Grant started bringing home documents about asset restructuring. He wanted me to sign over a piece of land in the suburbs that my parents had put in my name years ago. He called it a family investment, a way to secure Lila's future. In reality, Brielle was the one pushing him. He was drowning in debt, and my parents' legacy was the life raft he planned to steal. I looked at the documents on the kitchen table and felt a strange sense of power. They thought I was the same girl who walked into this house 6 years ago, desperate for their approval. They didn't realize I had already built a map of their destruction. If I scream, they win. I whispered to myself as I tucked the forensic report into my hidden notebook. If I stay calm, I can lead them exactly where they are weakest. I will not fight them with tears. I will fight them with the one thing they can't lie their way out of, the paper trail. I walked into the local branch of First National at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, my movements as steady as a clock. The air inside the bank was cool and smelled of old paper and security. I opened my safe deposit box and carefully slid the thick manila envelope inside. It contained everything: the original bank statements, the forensic accountant's report, and the ledger I had kept for years. I had already photographed every single page back at the apartment, uploading the images to 3 separate encrypted cloud drives. I was no longer just a wife trying to save a marriage. I was a librarian of their sins, and I was making sure my archives were fireproof. Back at the house, I moved with a cold, surgical precision. I installed small, legal security cameras in the common areas, ensuring they were positioned exactly according to North Carolina's privacy regulations. I also began archiving every exchange. Every dismissive email from Grant, every manipulative text from Darlene, they were all saved, backed up, and time-stamped. I wanted every look of contempt and every hidden threat recorded so there would be no room for "he said," "she said" when the time came. I started laying the bait. At the dinner table, I brought up the property in the suburbs that my parents had left to me. I am really considering the asset restructuring you mentioned. Grant, I said, picking at my salad and watching him through my lashes. It is a big decision, and I want to make sure it is right for Lila, but I can see why you are so pressed for it. The hunger in his eyes was almost pathetic. Darlene didn't even wait for me to finish my sentence. It is the only sensible thing to do. Megan, she urged, her voice trembling with an eagerness she couldn't hide. You should have the papers signed by Friday at the latest. The market is moving fast, and we cannot afford to wait. Grant's tone shifted throughout the week like a pendulum. 1 hour he was leaning against the doorframe, trying to look like the man I fell in love with, and the next, he was slamming cabinets and calling me selfish. Why must you be so stubborn, he snapped when I told him I needed more time to review the fine print. You are always holding this family back from its full potential. Do you want us to fail? Then came the Friday dinner, a performance so staged it made my skin crawl. Darlene had spent the afternoon cooking pot roast, my favorite meal from the early days. The house smelled of rosemary and feigned peace. She actually smiled at me, a terrifyingly thin expression that didn't reach her eyes. Grant was unnervingly gentle, pouring me a glass of wine and asking about my latest project at Northbridge Strategies. I just want us to be on the same page again. Honey, Grant said, his voice dropping to a soft, manipulative low. I know things have been difficult. But this land, it is the key to everything. I smiled back, sipping the wine that tasted like ash. I knew that gentleness had a price tag, and it was exactly the value of my inheritance. Later that night, as I stood in the darkened hallway near the kitchen, I heard them. They didn't know I was there, and they didn't know the recorder in my pocket was catching every word. If she doesn't sign by Monday, I am finished. Mom, Grant hissed. I could hear the sheer terror vibrating in his throat. The people I borrowed from, they are not going to wait anymore. They will come for the house. She will sign. Grant, Darlene whispered back, her voice like a snake in the grass. She is weak. She still wants you to love her. Just keep playing the part for 2 more days. The next morning, I wasn't at the house. I was in a glass-walled office downtown, sitting across from Ava Reddick. She didn't look like a savior. She looked like a surgeon. She tapped her pen against the financial files I had provided. We are not just filing for a standard divorce. Megan, Ava said, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. We are going for total asset protection and a civil discovery. We are going to prove he is trying to use your parents' legacy to pave over a hole he dug himself. I took it one step further. I reached out to a man named Marcus, an old high school friend of Grant's who now worked at a local notary office. He looked pained when I showed up, but he couldn't lie to me. I shouldn't even be showing you this, Marcus whispered, sliding a document across the desk in his cramped office. But Grant came in here last month. He signed a personal guarantee for a shell company called Blue Ridge Holdings. Megan, he used your marriage as the primary collateral for a massive private loan, a shell company, a name I had never heard in 6 years of marriage. He was using our legal union as a human shield to hide a black hole of debt that could have swallowed me and Lila whole. I stepped out onto the sidewalk of Cedar Ridge, the late afternoon sun hitting my face. I was done being the silent provider, the one who worked 60 hours a week so they could play their dangerous games. I didn't just want to leave the Harlow house. I wanted the law to strip away their masks in front of the neighbors, the church, and the entire community. I wanted them to stand in the cold light of the truth and answer for every cent they tried to steal from my daughter's future. It is time to move the king, I whispered to the empty street. Checkmate is coming. The week leading up to the mediation was a psychological war zone. Brielle Knox decided to move from the shadows into the light, sending me a series of provocative photos on Tuesday afternoon. One showed her draped over Grant's new leather car seats, Another was a mirror selfie in a silk robe I recognized from a boutique I could never afford. The caption read, "Some women are built to work like servants, and some are built to be served. Guess which one you are? Megan." I didn't cry. I didn't call her names. I simply took a screenshot of every message, logged the timestamp, and sent them directly to Ava Reddick's secure server. These weren't just insults. They were a roadmap of where my stolen salary was being spent. When I walked into the mediation room at 10 in the morning on Thursday, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Grant was already there, leaning back in his chair with a smirk that screamed invincibility. He looked expensive, from his tailored navy suit to the silver watch that probably cost 4 months of my mortgage payments. Beside him, his lawyer looked bored, as if this were just a routine errand. Ava didn't waste time. She laid out a spreadsheet that looked like a crime scene. "Mr. Harlow," she began, her voice as sharp as a scalpel. "Can you explain the $12,000 cash withdrawal from the joint account on the 14th of last month? It happened exactly 2 hours after my client's quarterly bonus was deposited." Grant's smirk didn't waver. "Family expenses, Ava. Business is volatile. I had to cover some personal overhead." Personal overhead, I cut in, my voice icy. "Is that what we are calling Brielle's new jewelry?" Now, Grant's face darkened, and he pivoted to the only weapon he had left: character assassination. He had spent the last month whispering in the ears of everyone we knew in Cedar Ridge. He had even targeted David, a kind, steady man I had started seeing a few months after the separation. Grant had sent David doctored bank statements and fake chat logs, painting me as a woman who was only after his inheritance. David, a man who valued peace above all else, had walked away 2 weeks ago. He couldn't handle the Harlow drama. As we moved into the hallway for a break, the mask of the golden boy finally slipped. Grant stepped into my personal space, the smell of his expensive cologne making my stomach turn. He twisted the gold band on his finger before sliding it off and throwing it at my feet. The ring skittered across the linoleum floor with a hollow, pathetic sound. "You think you're so smart? Megan," he hissed, leaning down so only I could hear him. "You're alone. Your fiancé was smart to run. No man wants a woman who keeps a ledger of her own husband's mistakes." I didn't reach for the ring. I didn't even look down at it. I looked directly into his eyes, which were dilated with a desperate, frantic sort of triumph. "Are you done?" I asked quietly. "What does throwing things prove?" "Grant, that you are still only good at destroying things." Darlene appeared then, emerging from the elevators like a tragic figure in a community theater play. She clutched her pearls, her voice rising to a performative wail that echoed through the legal wing. "How could you do this to us? Megan, you are destroying this family. We took you in, we loved you." I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped a single button. Darlene's own voice, recorded legally in our kitchen 3 months ago, filled the hallway. "I keep Megan's salary because she doesn't know the value of $1. It belongs to the Harlows now. If she doesn't like it, she can find another roof to live under." Darlene froze. Her mouth hung open, her face turning a mottled shade of purple. Grant's eyes darted toward his lawyer, who was suddenly looking very interested in his shoes. Grant thought I was devastated by David's departure, but he didn't realize that David was the price I was willing to pay to keep my network of evidence hidden until this very moment. I had traded a temporary comfort for a permanent victory. Ava stepped forward, her heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. "Since there is clear evidence of the commingling of funds and the systematic theft of my client's earnings, we are filing for an immediate order of asset preservation. As of this afternoon, Mr. Harlow, your access to any accounts linked to the Northbridge Strategies deposits is frozen." Grant's face went from arrogant to ashen in a matter of seconds. You can't do that," he stammered, his voice climbing an octave. I have obligations. People are waiting on that money. Then you should have thought about those people before you treated your wife's paycheck like a lottery win, Ava replied. As I walked toward the exit, my phone vibrated in my palm. It wasn't a text from David or a call from my parents. It was an email from an encrypted address I didn't recognize. The subject line was 3 words long, written in all caps, "Check the LLC." I stood by the glass doors of the courthouse, the North Carolina sun blindingly bright. I didn't know who sent it, but I knew the war was just beginning. The Check the LLC email led us down a rabbit hole lined with professional-grade deception. Ava and I spent 3 nights in her office, surrounded by stacks of paper and the smell of lukewarm coffee, until we found it Harlow Heritage Holdings. It was a shell company registered in the name of Darlene's reclusive cousin in South Carolina, a man who probably didn't even know how to open a bank account. The money trail was a dizzying circle. My salary would hit the joint account, stay for exactly 24 hours, and then vanish into the LLC before paying for things that had nothing to do with my daughter or my home. It was a textbook case of money laundering on a domestic scale. Grant tried to play the victim in court. He submitted a financial affidavit claiming he was earning less than $40,000 a year, portraying himself as a struggling man crushed by a high-powered wife. But Ava was ready. She slammed a stack of glossy receipts onto the table luxury car detailing, a membership at an elite cigar club, and a $5,000 deposit for a private gala, all paid for by the LLC. "Mr. Harlow," Ava said, her voice dripping with mock concern. "For a man who claims he cannot afford $500 a month in child support, you certainly have expensive taste in tobacco. Or should we ask why your mother's cousin is paying for your silk ties?" Grant's face turned a dusty shade of red. He signaled his lawyer, who brought forward a man named Derek, a former bartender from a place I hadn't visited in years. Derek testified under oath that he had seen me acting inappropriately with various men on multiple Friday nights. I felt the blood boil in my veins, but Ava's hand was a cold anchor on my arm. She didn't argue. She simply pulled up the Northbridge Strategies security logs and my GPS data on the large monitor for the judge to see. On every date Derek mentioned, I was in a glass-walled conference room at 7 in the evening, surrounded by 6 other project managers and 2 senior partners. "Mr. Miller," Ava said, leaning toward the witness with a predatory smile. "Perjury is a felony in this state. Did Grant Harlow pay you to sit here and lie about a mother's character?" Derek looked at Grant, his eyes wide with a sudden, frantic fear. He said it wouldn't be a big deal," he stammered, his voice trembling so hard the microphone picked up the rattle of his teeth. "He told me she was a monster. He sent me a message saying he'd cover my rent for 3 months. I just needed the money." The judge's gavel sounded like a gunshot. The witness's testimony was stricken, and Grant's credibility died right there in the fluorescent light of the courtroom. Because of my stable career and flexible schedule at the firm, the judge granted me primary custody of Lila. Grant was ordered to pay a fixed, non-negotiable amount of support, leaving him no room to hide behind his mother's skirts. Darlene didn't give up easily. She tried to turn our local church circle against me, whispering to the deacon about my greed and how I was abandoning a man in his time of need. I didn't engage in the gossip. I simply waited until the Sunday social and handed the pastor a folder containing the forensic bank statements and the recording of Darlene admitting she stole my wages. The silence that followed was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. The neighborhood whispers died out overnight, replaced by a cold, social exile for the Harlows. The best revenge is the one the court records for you. "Megan," Ava told me as we walked out of the final hearing, "keep your mouth shut. Let them talk themselves into a prison cell. Civilized people use the law, not the streets." Grant was now under a court order to provide a full, transparent accounting of his finances. Every hidden cent and every shell company transaction was now a potential criminal liability. He was no longer a husband, he was a defendant under a microscope. I was sitting in my new, sun-drenched living room that evening, watching Lila sleep, When my phone buzzed, it was an unknown number. You found the LLC, but that is just the surface. The message read, "You have no idea what he actually signed. He didn't just borrow money. He sold things he didn't own." I realized then that Grant Harlow hadn't just been cheating on me. He had been gambling with our very lives. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building only 5 minutes away from Lila's elementary school. It was smaller than the Harlow estate, but every square inch belonged to me. The walls were painted a crisp, gallery white, and the large windows let in the North Carolina sun until 7 in the evening. There were no navy shutters here, no heavy oak tables, and certainly no ledgers managed by anyone but myself. It was tidy. It was quiet, and for the first time in 6 years, I breathed air that didn't feel like it was being rationed. Work at Northbridge Strategies became my sanctuary. Without the weight of Darlene's constant surveillance and the emotional drain of Grant's gaslighting, my productivity soared. I wasn't just hitting my targets, I was shattering them. Within 4 months, I was promoted to senior project director with a 40% raise. The success felt like a chain reaction. I spent my evenings teaching myself the language of my own life emergency funds, 529 education accounts for Lila, and a digital filing system that tracked every cent. I was no longer blind. I was the architect. I didn't look for love. The wound left by David still throbbed on rainy nights, but I turned that pain into a vow. I would never again let a man's perception of me define my value. If the truth was too heavy for someone to carry, they didn't deserve to walk beside me. Ava Reddick met me for lunch on a Tuesday afternoon. "We have enough for a civil discovery." "Megan," she said, her eyes scanning the latest bank logs. "We can prove he dissipated marital assets to fund that LLC. But it's a gamble. If we miss, he'll use it to claim harassment." "Only if we are guessing," I replied. "I don't want to guess. I want to know." That knowledge came 2 nights later in the back corner of a dim coffee shop 3 towns over. I met Ellis, a man who had once been part of Grant's inner circle of investors. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His hands shook as he pushed a thumb drive across the scarred wooden table. I can't be involved in this, Megan," Ellis whispered, his voice cracking. Grant used the Harlow Heritage account to wash losses from a bad commercial deal in Charlotte. He wasn't just spending your money on Brielle, he was trying to hide a hole that is almost $200,000 deep. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Ellis, because he's desperate," he said, looking over his shoulder. "He's been forging signatures, not just yours, but people who have real power. There is a corporate lawyer downtown gathering evidence for a much larger racketeering suit. Please, just don't let my name come out. I have a family." I realized in that moment that the story was no longer about a cheating husband and a greedy mother-in-law. It was a systemic model of fraud. Grant Harlow wasn't just a villain in my life. He was a small, frantic fish in a very large, very dangerous net. He was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the wind was starting to pick up. I drove home in a daze, the weight of the thumb drive in my pocket feeling like a live wire. As I pulled into my parking spot, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a prestigious law firm downtown, one I had never contacted. "Hello? Is this Megan Caldwell?" a deep, professional voice asked. "Yes, it is. This is the office of Sterling and Associates. We are currently representing a group of creditors regarding some recent filings by a Grant Harlow. Based on our preliminary investigation, you may be our most important witness." I looked up at the light in my apartment window, where Lila was safe, and the truth was finally starting to scream. "I'm listening," I said. The white colonial house in Cedar Ridge did not stay quiet for long. Less than 2 weeks after I moved out, Grant paraded Brielle Knox through the front door as if he were bringing home a trophy. Darlene played the part of the doting mother-in-law to the new queen, calling Brielle a savior and a breath of fresh air compared to my cold corporate shell. But the air in that house turned sour faster than anyone expected. Brielle convinced Grant that he needed to be more than just a middle manager. He needed to be an entrepreneur. She pushed him to invest in a boutique bistro downtown, a vanity project designed to make them the power couple of Cedar Ridge, to save face and keep his new prize happy. Grant took out high-interest private loans, signing papers in the middle of the night while Darlene slept. The debt piled up like autumn leaves. Soon, men in cheap suits started appearing on the sidewalk in front of the Harlow house. Darlene was in a state of constant, vibrating panic, yet she still spent her Sunday mornings at the grocery store bragging about their new business ventures. At work, Grant was a disaster. When he was finally called into HR for a disciplinary hearing, he didn't look in the mirror. He blamed me. "It is all her fault. She is trying to bury me," Grant screamed in the hallway of the Harlow house one night. "I knew this because my legal cameras were still recording. If she hadn't started this war, I would be fine." Then, the first real twist arrived. A woman named Sheila contacted Darlene. Sheila was a victim. She met Darlene at a diner and told her that Brielle Knox had done this before in Georgia and Virginia. She targeted men with stable families, drained their credit, and vanished. Darlene began her own frantic investigation. She found blurred copies of identification papers and a social security number that didn't match the one on the lease. The deeper she dug, the more she realized that the woman she had welcomed into her home was a professional ghost. When Brielle realized she was being watched, she turned the pregnancy into a tactical weapon. Whenever Darlene tried to confront her, Brielle would clutch her stomach and drop to her knees. "You are going to kill this baby with your stress," Brielle would gasp, her voice thick with manufactured tears. Do you want Grant to lose his only son? If you keep hounding me, I will leave and you will never see him." Grant, caught in the middle, tried to play the role of the strong patriarch. In a fit of sheer, unadulterated panic, he signed a new series of guarantees to cover the bistro's mounting losses, using his mother's house as the final collateral. The end came on a Tuesday night during a torrential North Carolina downpour. While Grant and Darlene were in the kitchen arguing over a $30 grocery bill, Brielle moved through the house like a shadow. The next morning, Grant found his office safe wide open and empty. The $50,000 in cash he had been hiding, along with Darlene's heirloom jewelry, was gone. There was no goodbye, no explanation, only a single piece of heavy stationery left on the bed. "Don't find me," it read. Grant stood in the middle of the room, and for the first time in his life, he had no one to blame but himself. I walked through the sliding glass doors of Ridgeway Medical Center at exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. I found Darlene Harlow slumped in a row of orange plastic chairs. The woman who had once stood like a queen now looked like a pile of discarded laundry. The moment she saw me, she scrambled to her feet. "Megan, thank God," she rasped. She pointed toward the cashier's window. "You have to help. They won't move him to the neurological wing without a deposit. It is $35,000. Just $35,000. Please, you have the accounts. You have the money." I reached down and peeled her fingers off my coat, one by one. "I didn't come here to pay. Darlene," I said, "I came here to see what was left." A doctor approached us. "Mrs. Harlow, your husband has survived the initial trauma, but the brain injury is severe. He has significant swelling in the temporal lobe. To be blunt, there is a high probability he will remain in a persistent vegetative state. The long-term care costs, well, they will be astronomical." Darlene let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob. It was a thin, high-pitched whine. "We are family, Megan," she whispered. "You can't do this. You have to think about the family ties, the history, please, for the sake of humanity. Family loyalty was something you sold a long time ago. Darlene, you didn't want a daughter-in-law. You wanted a silent benefactor. Well, the silence is over. I held the screen of my phone in front of Darlene's face. It was a medical timeline for Brielle Knox. You were so excited about the new Harlow bloodline, weren't you? But look at the dates. Darlene, look at the conception window. Grant was in Raleigh for 3 weeks during that entire month, and Brielle was, well, she was with the man who actually owns that shell company in South Carolina. Darlene stared at the screen. She began to hyperventilate. The baby, it can't be. She choked out. She said, she promised. It was a boy, a Harlow boy. The baby isn't his. I said, you traded everything for a lie, and now you are left with a son who can't speak and a mountain of debt that will swallow that house whole. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small business card for the Harbor Light Relief Fund. This is the limit of my mercy. They can help you navigate the paperwork for the state-funded care. Don't call me again. I turned to walk away when I heard a familiar, sharp ringtone. Darlene answered on speakerphone, her voice a broken wreck. The caller ID on her screen was visible, unknown attorney's office. Is this Darlene Harlow? This is the office of the district attorney. We are calling regarding a formal complaint of financial fraud and the freezing of assets related to Harlow Heritage Holdings. We need you to come in for questioning immediately. Darlene looked up at me, her face turning a ghostly shade of white. I just turned and walked out, knowing that the final bell had just rung. Darlene's hands were shaking so violently that she nearly dropped the phone. The voice on the other end continued. We have successfully traced the Harlow Heritage LLC transactions back to the primary accounts. A court order has been signed to freeze all assets related to Grant Harlow and any associated entities. Furthermore, the attorney stated that they were filing a request for a criminal investigation. Darlene looked like she had been struck by lightning. Just then, a nurse beckoned us into the recovery room. Grant was drifting in and out of consciousness. He caught the tail end of the conversation. He heard the words asset freeze, subpoena, and discovery. He tried to push himself up, but he didn't have the strength. The terror in his eyes was the most honest thing I had ever seen on his face. I walked into the room with Ava Reddick right beside me. I have already provided the state with the archives, I said. Every bank statement, every recorded admission, and every time-stamped photo has been logged and verified. It is all legal, Grant, every bit of it. Grant let out a dry, rattling breath. Who told you about the LLC, he wheezed. You were too stupid to find that. On your own. Ava stepped forward. The email you received, Megan, came from the senior internal accountant at the firm Grant was using to wash the money. He decided he didn't want to go to prison for a man who didn't even know his last name. He became our star witness the moment the first subpoena hit his desk. Grant looked at me with a pathetic attempt at his old arrogance, but the boomerang of his own malice had finally made its way back. I looked at Darlene, who was leaning against the wall. I am giving you one final choice. I will sign a settlement to close the remaining civil disputes regarding the property, but in exchange, you will both sign a permanent no-harassment agreement. If you don't, I will make sure the criminal prosecutors have enough paper to keep you in court for the next 10 years. Darlene collapsed into the chair. Megan, please, she sobbed. Think of the family. Save our honor. We will be ruined in front of everyone. Honor is not something you beg for with tears, Darlene. It is something you keep through your actions. At that exact moment, Grant's phone began to vibrate. It was a call from Ava Reddick's office. I had told her to wait for my signal. Grant answered it. Mr. Harlow. Ava's voice came through. I am just calling to inform you that I have officially filed a warrant for the search of your additional digital financial records under a court-ordered mandate. The police will be arriving at the Cedar Ridge property within the hour. Grant's eyes rolled back slightly as the color drained from his lips. He looked like a man who had finally realized that the cage he had built for me was now locked from the outside. I reached into my trench coat pocket and pulled out the gold wedding band. I placed it on the side table, right next to his glass of water. "You threw this away to prove I had nothing," I said softly. "I am just returning it to its proper place in the past." I didn't wait for a reply. I turned my back on the wreckage of the Harlow name and walked out toward the exit, feeling the cool night air waiting for me. I was Megan Caldwell, and for the first time in a very long time, I was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are listening from today, so please leave a comment below to join the conversation and share your thoughts on Megan's journey. Please remember to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support us by hitting the hype button so more people can hear this powerful story. Your support means everything.